Paris. Autumn, 1789. A 16-year-old girl is standing at the edge of a ship. She is pregnant, and she refuses to get on. Under the law of France, she is free where she stands. But that ship is taking her to Virginia. And under Virginia law, the moment she steps back onto American soil, she becomes property again. Property of the man who owns her, Thomas Jefferson. The same Thomas Jefferson who had written, just 13 years earlier, "All men are created equal." Her name is Sally Hemings. She is the half-sister of Jefferson's late wife. She is carrying his child. And she knows exactly what will happen if she gets on that ship. But Sally does not run. She does something far more dangerous. She negotiates. And what she asks for is not freedom for herself. She asks for freedom for children who have not even been born yet. Every one of them. Even the ones who do not yet exist. Jefferson agrees. And Sally gets on the ship. But what happened after that agreement would take nearly 4 decades to unfold. And when it was finally over, every one of the children she had bargained for walked out of Monticello free. Sally never did. Good evening, and welcome to Bognice TV. There is a room at Monticello, the house Thomas Jefferson built on a mountaintop in Virginia, that visitors walked past for 76 years without knowing what it was. It is small, 14 feet and 8 inches wide, 13 feet deep. There are no windows. It was built in 1809 below ground level in the south wing of the house, only a short walk from Jefferson's own bedroom. In 1941, the people entrusted with preserving that house laid tile over its brick floor, placed partitions against its plaster walls, and turned it into a men's restroom. It remained that way for the rest of the century. Through Truman, through Eisenhower, through Kennedy, through the moon landing, through Watergate, and through the bicentennial summer of 1976. Then, in 2017, archaeologists removed the tile. And beneath it was the room where Sally Hemings had lived. The woman who lived there left no letters we know of. No diary. No portrait exists in any collection anywhere in the world. Only 4 descriptions of her survive. And every one of them was written by someone else. She died in Charlottesville in 1835. And no one alive today can tell you where she was buried. Her name was Sally Hemings. And almost everything we know about her comes down to a single afternoon in 1873. Her son sat down with a reporter from a small newspaper in Ohio. He was 68 years old. He had outlived almost everyone. And he told the reporter what his mother had told him, and what her mother had told her before that. When he reached the oldest part of the story, something that had happened 3 generations before he was even born, he added a quiet sentence. "Such is the story that comes down to me." And what comes down to us is this. In the autumn of 1789, in Paris, a girl of 16 refused to board a ship. She belonged to Thomas Jefferson, the man who had written 13 years earlier that all men are created equal. Under the law of France, she was free. Under the law of Virginia, she would not be. And she was already carrying a child who, if she chose wrong, would be born the property of its own father. She did not run. She negotiated. Tonight, we tell the story of the bargain she made in that city, what she asked for, what it cost her, and what the record says she was worth in the end. But this story begins long before Paris, 4 generations earlier, in a Virginia port town, with a sailor who tried to buy his own daughter. Sometime in the 1730s, in the port of Williamsburg, Virginia, an English sea captain named Hemings learned that a woman he knew had given birth to his daughter. The woman was enslaved. She had been born in Africa and carried across the ocean in the hold of a ship. She belonged to a planter named John Wales, which meant the child belonged to him too. From the first hour, before she even had a name, the captain went to Wales and offered to buy her. Not to hire her, to buy his own daughter, to take her away, to make her free. Wales said no. According to the account passed down through the family, the captain offered an extraordinary price. He was refused again, so he made another plan. He would take the child by force if he had to, by stealth if he could. But word travels through a household. Someone carried the news to the great house. Wales brought the mother and baby inside under his own eye, where the sailor could not reach them. The captain sailed out of Williamsburg. He never came back. The daughter he could not buy was named Elizabeth Hemings. Her family called her Betty. She would spend her entire life as the property of the man who had refused to sell her, and then of his heirs, and she would live long enough to hold 6 of her grandchildren. We should stay with Betty for a moment, because of how her story ends. Betty Hemings died at Monticello, an old woman in bed. Among the people in the room was a small boy, 3 years old, her grandson. He was eating a piece of bread. He looked at his grandmother and, because he was 3 and did not understand what was happening, asked her if she would like some. She said no. Granny doesn't want bread anymore. She died shortly afterward. That boy would live another 70 years, and it was the first thing he could remember about anything. Betty Hemings had 14 children in all. 6 of them were fathered by John Wales after his wife died. The arrangement lasted for years. Her grandson, writing in 1873, used the word concubine for it because it was the only word the century had given him. The youngest of those 6 children was born in 1773. Her name was probably Sarah. Everyone called her Sally. John Wales died that same year. He never saw the child grow, and when his estate was divided, everything he owned was parceled out among his heirs: the land, the debts, and the people. The largest share went to his eldest daughter by his first marriage. Her name was Martha. Martha Wales was married to a lawyer from Albemarle County who had just turned 30, Thomas Jefferson. Under Virginia law, whatever came to a wife came to her husband. So, in 1774, a 1-year-old girl became the property of Thomas Jefferson. Think about what that meant inside one household. Sally Hemings and Martha Jefferson had the same father. They were half-sisters, born only 8 months apart in status, but 25 years apart in age. One was the lady of the house at Monticello. The other was carried up the mountain as a toddler and entered in the records as property. Nobody in that house pretended not to know. It simply had no bearing on anything. The Hemings family was not sent to the fields. They were brought into the house. They were given work that required trust. Sally's half-brother Martin became the butler. Her brother Robert traveled with Jefferson to Philadelphia in 1775 when the Continental Congress met. Her mother, by most accounts, ran the household itself. And Sally, from about the age of 6, was assigned to watch Jefferson's youngest daughters. That was the work. Mind the children. Fetch what was needed. Stay close. Stay quiet. There was almost nothing else. No school. No letters. No record of a single thing, she said. In the summer of 1781, when British dragoons came up the mountain and Martin Hemings hid the family silver rather than tell them where Jefferson had gone, Sally was 8 years old and somewhere inside that house. We know she was there. We do not know where she stood. Only 4 descriptions of Sally Hemings survive from anyone who saw her. The fullest came decades later from a blacksmith named Isaac Granger, who had himself been enslaved at Monticello. He remembered her as mighty near white, very handsome, with long, straight hair down her back. That is the most detailed portrait of Sally Hemings that exists. 15 words. From a man who worked in the shop. Then, in 1782, the woman at the center of the house began to die. Martha Jefferson had endured at least 8 pregnancies in 10 years and had buried most of her children. Her last delivery came in May. She never recovered. She lay ill through the summer. And on September 6th, she died. She was 33. Her husband did not take it well. He shut himself away for weeks, and when he came out, he rode the mountain roads alone until he could bear the house again. 2 years later, he accepted a post in Paris. He left the country, taking his eldest daughter with him and one enslaved man, Sally's older brother James, whom he intended to train as a French cook. Sally stayed behind. She was 11. For the next 3 years, she was sent where the younger Jefferson girls were sent, to relatives' plantations, doing what she had always done, minding the children. Then, in 1787, a letter came from France. 8-year-old Polly was to be put on a ship and sent to her father. An older woman was supposed to travel with her, but she had just given birth and could not go. So they sent the girl who had been minding Polly since Polly could walk. She was 14. She had never been off a plantation, and now she was crossing the Atlantic Ocean in the company of a child. They were 5 weeks at sea. When they landed in London, they were met by Abigail Adams, the wife of the American minister there. She took one look at the arrangement and wrote to Paris in something close to alarm. The girl sent to look after Polly, she reported, was quite a child herself, but she added something else almost in passing. The girl seemed fond of the child and appeared good-natured. It is one of the 4 descriptions of Sally, and the only one that says anything at all about who she was rather than what she looked like. 2 weeks later, a carriage carried her out of London toward Paris, toward a city where slavery did not exist, and where a 14-year-old girl was about to discover that the law could work differently. She arrived in Paris in the middle of July, 1787. The first thing that happened to her was a needle. Smallpox was in the city. Jefferson had her inoculated by one of the famous doctors, Sutton. In that era, this meant deliberately exposing her to infection and then isolating her somewhere outside the city until the danger passed. She would spend weeks alone in a room, sick, in a country whose language she did not speak. And she was only 14. When she recovered, they began to train her. She was taught needlework, the care of fine clothing, how to launder linen that cost more than a field hand was valued at, how to keep silk from ruin. She was taught to dress hair the way Paris wore it that season. She was being made into a lady's maid. Jefferson's daughters were boarding at a convent school and moving in society, and society required an attendant. She was also taught French, not formally, so far as anyone recorded. But she was in that house and in that city for more than 2 years. Her son said afterward that by the end of it, she was beginning to understand the language well, and she was paid. This is the part that matters. In France, there was no slavery, not merely as a sentiment, as a fact of law, a fact the courts enforced. And any enslaved person brought into the country could invoke it. So Jefferson put her on the household books. From time to time, he entered a wage beside her name, 12 livres a month, roughly $2. Her brother James, in the same house, was being paid more than twice that, and paid regularly. The Frenchman who washed the dishes was paid more than she was. Still, she was 14 years old. And for the first time in the history of her family, going back to a woman taken from Africa and a captain who could not buy his daughter, money was being handed to a Hemings for her work. For 5 weeks in the spring of 1789, Jefferson sent her to board with the family Laresse, a woman named Dupré. Nobody has ever explained why. She spent more than a month in a French woman's household, in a city that did not recognize the claim anyone had on her. 5 weeks. In 62 years. That is the only stretch we can point to when Sally Hemings lived somewhere the Jefferson family did not control. That same spring, Jefferson's daughter Patty turned 17 and began going out in Paris society. Sally went with her, into rooms with chandeliers, on evenings that ran late, standing along the wall where a maid stands. The expense books registered the change without commenting on it. Jefferson started buying more clothing for his daughter, and at the same time, more clothing for Sally. Outside those rooms, Paris was coming apart. Bread had failed. In July, crowds took the Bastille, and the American minister who had helped write one revolution watched a second one begin from his windows, and inside the Hotel de Languiac, something else had happened. By the time Jefferson was recalled to America in the autumn of 1789, Sally Hemings was pregnant. She was 16. He was 46, and he owned her. We should be plain about the shape of that fact once, and then go on. There is a debate about what exactly happened between them that has lasted for 200 years. Historian Annette Gordon Reed has set out the terms of it clearly. Whatever else was or was not true between them, Jefferson could have sold her if he chose. She could not refuse him. That is not a footnote to this story. It is the ground the entire story stands on. Now, the ship. Jefferson made arrangements to sail in the autumn, and Sally Hemings told him she was not going. Understand what she was saying. In Paris, she was free. If she returned to Virginia, she would be a slave again. Her son wrote it in exactly those terms 84 years later in a newspaper in Ohio. she could stay. 16 years old, pregnant, illiterate, in a foreign city on the edge of a revolution, with no money, no family except a brother who was making the same calculation in the same house. She could stay and be free, and be entirely alone. Or she could get on the ship and become property again,